More than half of us are in support of establishing a special economic zone to stimulate economic growth in Northern Australia. According to a poll commissioned by the Institute of Public Affairs, 60% of Australians are in favour of setting a SEZZ to encourage investment in the region. For more, I'm joined by the IPA's Director, North Australia Project, Hugh Tobin. Hugh, good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Just explain, in basic language, what a special economic zone is.
Well, what Australians have said they would support the establishment of a low tax, low regulation zone right across the northern parts of Australia. So taking in northern Western Australia, the Northern Territory and northern Queensland. And we would have a mixture of incentives in this zone to try and encourage investment and to drive economic growth. At the moment we're sitting on what is expected to be a mining boom, but we can't just assume that that's going to continue without support from government. So we need to put in place policies that continue to support investment by major companies in Australia in the coming years and coming decades.
Okay, so Hugh, is this lower tax rates? I mean, what is the blueprint? What are the specific rules that would, take hold in this special economic zone? Or is it just simply too early to determine?
Well, at this stage we've started the discussion. We've found that people support the zone. This project's 3 months old. We're starting to talk to communities in parts of Northern Australia, and we're finding out exactly what incentives should be included in this zone. It might include reducing fringe benefit tax. It might include reducing regulation. At the moment there's massive duplication. There's massive complication of regulation between local, state and federal governments, and so we can look at something like a one-stop shop for regulation to try and make it easier for companies to invest in Australia. At the moment it's a massive task to invest, and what people want is certainty. When we've got new mining taxes, new carbon taxes, it's a real concern for investment, and what we've seen is that countries such as China are looking to other regions such as Western Africa, looking to Brazil, and they're trying to reduce their reliance on Australian exports.
Sorry, Hugh. So is this then a way of getting some of these big projects, these big companies which are operating in the areas that you're talking about for this special economic zone, to remain outside of the mining tax, as you just mentioned, outside of the carbon tax?
Well, certainly we think those policies should be reviewed. They're punishing the successful industries in Australia. What we saw in the recent federal budget was a real reliance on the mining boom in coming years to return Australia to surplus. But the worry for Australia is we've seen commodity prices this year at historically high levels. They've come a bit back, but if they drop further, then we're going to see some real worries for the federal budget. And whilst the government's relying on these mining taxes and carbon taxes, it's really not looking past its getting back to surplus through taxing these industries. It needs to look at long-term investment and trying to encourage investment by these companies, because Australia is not the only country with minerals and resources. There's many other countries, and China's looking to West Africa, to Brazil, and we've seen just in recent years our trade advantage in terms of our proximity drop in terms of shipping ore from Australia to China by $40 per tonne 3 years ago. It's now down to $12 per tonne in terms of advantage, and with the introduction of very large ore carriers, we're expecting that to drop even further.
Okay, Hugh, it's interesting though, because you mentioned Australia in comparison to Canada and some of the other nations that also have mining interests, but special economic zones, as far as I can tell, exist in places such as Angola and Bangladesh and Kazakhstan and Pakistan and Philippines, Cambodia, and North Korea. Are there any other Western countries that have such zones? Because it does sound that they exist mainly in developing countries. Does Australia really need such a zone?
Certainly they exist in developing countries, but they also do exist in developed countries. If you look at the UK, they've just announced 21 zones that they're going to be putting in place in urban areas. And USA also has a range of different types of economic zones. These are types of areas that have been proven around the world to be successful in driving economic investment and growth, and there's no reason why a country like Australia shouldn't put in place a zone such as this. It might take a bit of vision and a bit of leadership and cooperation between state, territory and federal governments to get it in place, but we think it's important, and we think that the government needs to show vision in this area, because otherwise, if we sit on our hands and just assume the mining boom's going to tick along, then other countries who are gearing up to challenge us in terms of trade with China and India and developing nations will take business from Australia.
Okay. Do you think, though, that realistically included in any sort of a special economic zone would be the carbon tax and the mining tax? Like, is that something that you'd be pushing for?
Well, certainly I think we need to review all these policies. The carbon tax and the mining tax, we've both seen those policies questioned by big business, and we've seen companies such as Xstrata come out and say that they are going to reduce potentially some of their major projects in parts of Queensland and other areas as a result of these policies. So I think we need to review them. We've seen that both from the public and from big business there is concern about these policies, and so the special economic zone should look at all these policies and start from scratch and work out, in terms of regulation, do we need a one-stop shop? In terms of the carbon tax, if we're going to put a price on carbon, perhaps there's a better way of doing it. In terms of a mining tax, do we need to be punishing the mining sector for being a successful industry? Why are we punishing successful industries? Why aren't we encouraging more investment in that industry? Is the current mining expenditure in Australia enough, or could we potentially be looking at greater expenditure by some of these major international companies? So all these things need to be looked at, and we'd certainly promote a cost-benefit analysis so that we get the mix and the balance right in terms of the incentives we offer in such a zone.
Okay, Hugh, thanks for joining us and getting us across that. We do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nadine.
That's Hugh Tobin from the IPA, the Institute of Public Affairs. You're watching